Before we start, I want to make something clear. What I'm about to share with you in this video is not intended to convince or deter anyone from taking ADHD medication. This is purely my personal experience, which started off really well but eventually took a turn for the worse. It's important to understand that what works for one person might not work for another, and that's okay. In a previous video, I discussed how I came to realize I had ADHD. It wasn't exactly a sudden epiphany, but more of a gradual understanding as I began to notice certain patterns in my behavior. I was often unable to hold attention on tasks, didn't seem to listen when spoken to directly, and was easily distracted. These are all classic symptoms of ADHD, and after connecting the dots, I knew I needed to do something about it. The solution seemed obvious: medication. However, in America, medication isn't cheap, so this decision wasn't made lightly. It wasn't a matter of just trying something out of curiosity, it was a response to a real need. My ADHD brain wasn't very productive. My thoughts were either incomplete or constantly overlapping, creating a chaotic mental environment that made it extremely frustrating to focus on anything. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine trying to solve a simple math problem, like what is 2 plus 2? But instead of just solving it, your brain starts jumping around. First, you think the answer is 2, then maybe 4, then you start questioning the concept of math itself. Who even invented math? And what's the point of it all, anyway? This chaotic thought process isn't just frustrating, it's debilitating, especially when you're trying to get things done. This doesn't just happen when I'm alone, either. I've found myself forgetting people's names mid-conversation, zoning out during important discussions, and generally struggling to stay on task in both school and work environments. It's a big part of why I had to retake classes in high school, and honestly, I just wanted to feel in control of my mind for once. Med seemed like a way to achieve that. So, after talking to my doctor, I started with Adderall. There are a lot of ADHD medications out there: Adderall, Vyvanse, Ritalin, Concerta, just to name a few, and Adderall was the first one I tried. We started with a low dose, about 5 milligrams, just to see how it would affect me. At first, Adderall was a game changer. It took a little while to kick in, but once it did, I found myself with this strange new ability to just do things. Normally, a day in my unmedicated life would look something like this. I'd think of a task, let's call it task A, that I needed to do. But before I could start, my brain would be like, wait, there's this other thing you should do first because it'll only take a minute. And then that would happen a couple more times until I'd find myself working on the least important task, getting halfway through it, taking a break, forgetting about all the other tasks, and then getting distracted by something else entirely. And just like that, the day would be over, and I'd have made almost no progress on anything important. But with Adderall, it was different. I'd think of task A, and then I'd just do task A. No distractions, no endless loop of competing thoughts, just pure, unadulterated focus. It was incredible. For a while, everything seemed to be going great. But, as with many things in life, the honeymoon phase didn't last forever. Over time, I started to notice something troubling. While Adderall gave me the ability to complete tasks, it didn't necessarily help me focus on the right ones. I could physically get things done, like vacuuming, doing dishes, and cleaning up around the house, but when it came to tasks that required deep thought or concentration, it was like hitting a mental wall. The focus I needed, the kind that would help me with work or important life decisions, was still out of reach. So, eventually, I decided to stop taking Adderall. After discussing this with a friend who also has ADHD, I learned about another medication called Vyvanse. Vyvanse is supposed to work differently than other ADHD meds. It's a slower burn, which means it can help in different ways for different people. My friend mentioned that Vyvanse helped him a lot with focus, which was exactly what I was looking for. Considering my goals and my general aversion to the more intense stimulants like Adderall, I brought up the idea of trying Vyvanse with my psychiatrist, and we decided to give it a go. Taking Vyvanse was a completely different experience. On the first day, it took about an hour to kick in, and when it did, I was watching a show about space flight. Instead of consuming multiple forms of media at once, which is usually my style, I found myself keenly aware and deeply focused on the space documentary. This was a new level of focus, far beyond what I'd experienced with Adderall. But then something unexpected happened. My curiosity about space flight led me down a rabbit hole of learning and researching the science of rocket flight and orbital mechanics. Cool, right? But not exactly what I needed to be doing that day. This became a recurring theme with Vyvanse. While the medication gave me incredible focus, it didn't necessarily help me focus on the right things. I quickly realized that if I wasn't doing what I needed to be doing when the medication kicked in, I would end up spending the entire day locked into some random task that wasn't even on my to-do list. Some days were incredibly productive, while others were completely shot, and it all felt like a gamble. At first, I thought I just needed to get my habits right. Maybe if I could structure my day better or set more concrete goals, I could harness this focus in a way that worked for me. But then some weird stuff started happening. One day, I took my Vyvanse and started working on something, one of many things I wasn't supposed to be working on, and suddenly I felt out of breath. My first thought was that I had COVID, so I went through the motions, took a test, talked to doctors, but the test came back negative. It wasn't COVID, so what was it? The feeling was like I had just finished jogging, but it was constant, even though I hadn't been exercising. I began to suspect that the medication was causing these symptoms, but I was so desperate for it to work that I kept taking it. Looking back, I was definitely in denial. I didn't want to admit that the meds might be the problem because I was so focused on the potential benefits. Eventually, the symptoms got worse. I started getting headaches, and my sleep was terrible. I could hardly get any rest, which only made everything else worse. By this point, I knew I needed to talk to my psychiatrist, but when I finally tried to reach out, he was out of town and unreachable. In a moment of desperation, I did something really stupid, something you should never do. I stopped taking the meds cold turkey. I want to be clear, this is not something I recommend to anyone. You should always consult your doctor before making any changes to your medication. Fortunately for me, I didn't have any adverse reactions to stopping the meds, but I was incredibly lucky. After a few days without the medication, the symptoms went away, and I started to feel normal again. So, that's my experience with ADHD medication. I'm off meds now, and while I'm glad to be free of the side effects, it also means I'm back to square one in terms of managing my ADHD. I think the moral of the story here is not to be tunnel-visioned on results like I was. If you're having a bad experience with your medication, don't wait until things get worse. Talk to your medical professional as soon as possible. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to subscribe.